Imagine this. Two nations that have just emerged from war. Two peoples who have survived decades of bloodshed. Two armies that once shared their very last bullets. Once took shelter in the same trench. Once fought under the same ideal. To overthrow oppression, to claim freedom. And then, just a few years later, those very same people turn their gun barrels toward one another. Not because of oil. Not because of religion. Not because of ideology. But because of a town so small that many people around the world have never heard its name. Badme. In 1998, on this barren land, a dispute that seemed solvable with maps and diplomacy turned into the bloodiest war in Africa at the end of the 20th century. To understand why Badme could kill tens of thousands of people, we must go back very far, to a time before Eritrea even existed as a nation. For most of the 20th century, Eritrea was not independent. It was a colony of Italy. Then after the Second World War, it was annexed by Ethiopia. That annexation did not bring peace. It opened a war that lasted more than 30 years. One of the most prolonged wars of independence in African history. Throughout those 3 decades, Eritreans took up arms against the Ethiopian government. But history holds a bitter paradox. In the final stage of the war, the common enemy of both Eritrea and Ethiopia was no longer each other. It was the Marxist military regime known as the Derg. A brutal government that spread terror, repressed its own Ethiopian people, and turned the entire country into a battlefield. And so, in forests and mountains, in deserts, Eritrean fighters and Ethiopian rebel forces fought on the same front line. They shared rations. They shared water. They shared the belief that, after everything, a new era would begin. And indeed, it did begin. In 1991, the Derg regime collapsed. In 1993, Eritrea held a referendum. More than 99% of the population voted in favor of independence. Most remarkably, Ethiopia recognized the result. There was no war. There was no bloodbath. The world called it one of the rare peaceful secessions in Africa. But history rarely kills with a single stab. It kills with small, silent cuts. The greatest problem between the two young nations had never been resolved. The border. The Eritrea-Ethiopia border stretches more than 1,000 kilometers. Much of it was drawn during the Italian colonial era, on inaccurate maps, and was never clearly demarcated on the ground. Among these ambiguous areas, Badme emerged like a thorn. Badme was not wealthy. It was not strategic. It held no clear economic value. But for newly independent governments, Badme represented something else. Backhand index pointing right national honor. Both Eritrea and Ethiopia believed that Badme belonged to them. And in a climate of rising nationalism, neither side dared to step back. If we make concessions, the leaders told themselves, we will lose legitimacy in the eyes of our people. Reason was gradually pushed aside. Diplomacy was seen as weakness. Compromise was seen as betrayal. In May 1998, the first shots were fired in Badme. At first, it was only a border skirmish. An incident history had witnessed hundreds of times before. But this time, no one backed down. Within just a few weeks, a small clash turned into full-scale war. Two poor nations, just emerging from conflict, mobilized more than 500,000 soldiers. Tanks rolled into arid lands. Artillery thundered day and night. Air forces bombed cramped defensive positions. The most horrifying thing was not the scale, but the way they fought. This was not high-tech warfare. These were not precision strikes. It was old-style war. Infantry charging head-on. Through minefields. Through trenches. Under dense artillery fire. Like the First World War. But fought in Africa. At the end of the 20th century. Over 2 years. Badme and the surrounding areas became a human meat grinder. Between 70,000 and 100,000 people were killed. Millions of civilians were displaced. The economies of both countries were exhausted. And the most ironic part? Backhand index pointing right, Badme was nearly leveled. Yet it brought no decisive victory to either side. In 2000, under international pressure, the two sides signed the Algiers Agreement. An international court was established. Its final ruling declared Badme belonged to Eritrea. But the war did not truly end. Ethiopia did not fully withdraw its forces. Eritrea did not trust its opponent's goodwill. The two nations entered the strangest state in international relations. No war, no peace. For nearly 20 years. The border remained frozen. Armies faced each other in silence. The economy was strangled. And an entire generation grew up in hostility. Without truly understanding why. Not until 2018. Was a historic peace agreement finally signed. Closing one of the most senseless conflicts in Africa. The Eritrea-Ethiopia War left behind a bitter truth. Human beings do not always kill each other over resources. Not always over religion or ideology. Sometimes. All it takes is an ambiguous border. And national pride. To claim tens of thousands of lives. A town with no economic value. Became the price of national honor. And history, as always, leaves us with a question that is not easy to answer. Backhand index pointing right, can peace achieved through blood and tears ever truly be sustainable?